Hello, and welcome to this segment of the oral history of the Diocese of San Jose. My name is Ann Gritch, and I am delighted that with us today is Helen Bunje, one of the great ladies of the Diocese of San Jose. So, Helen, welcome.
Well, thank you, Ann. When you first talked to me about my memories and my time since the beginning of the diocese, and I went through them and made a few notes, I thought, this is wonderful. It was really exciting, and I was glad to do it.
I'm so glad, too. And you have contributed so much to the diocese. Let's start even before the diocese was erected. Now, when did you and Carl move to Palo Alto?
We moved to Palo Alto in 1960.
1960, okay. So we were very much in the Archdiocese of San Francisco at that time.
San Francisco.
San Francisco. And as I recall, Carl did deacon training when we were part of the Archdiocese. Can you talk a little about that?
Yes, Carl did his deacon training. Let's see, he was ordained in 1979, so it would have been, what, 2
years previously?
Previous to that. And
that was fairly new, the deacon.
It was a new experience to have a class like that, and it was very interesting, shall we say, and very difficult for me in many ways. Number one, Carl traveled every other week, so you know who had to make sure she was there taking careful notes and getting the material together.
Right. Because the deacon program, ours as well as, I think just across the boards, the classes.
You didn't want to miss a class.
Right, that the wives were included.
He could make most of them, but every now and then there would be
business called, sure.
There would be another one.
Right.
And it was a wonderful group of people, and there were wonderful teachers. However, what was very difficult for me was that I had been in ministry for some time, in hospital ministry, and I think I had just completed a full year's internship while he was still in the deacon program. And it was a lot of work because we had family too.
5 children, as I recall.
5 children, and grandma living with us. And great-grandma had passed on. We tended to live in bulk.
Multi-generational.
Right. And week after week, the women would be told how they were to be so supportive of their husbands. This was a new thing. They'd be away perhaps doing things. They'd be preparing homilies, and they were to make sure they were to support them in this new venture.
Yeah. Because really it was Vatican II that restored the order of the diaconate.
Yes, it was.
So it was only just a few years later that San Francisco, the Archdiocese, implemented.
Right. What made it very difficult for me was being a woman in ministry. I felt like women in ministry didn't matter in this crowd. I was a wife, and that was to come first in terms of supporting the diaconate. And I was always glad to support Carl because he'd always been involved. He was what was called a BCL by Monsignor Boyle. He'd call him Big Catholic Layman.
Big Catholic Layman. Then he became a BCD, Big Catholic Deacon.
That's right. And he'd gone off to San Francisco, to do his thing, and then the deacon training program. And I had thought, well, we'd always been in ministry, whether we lived in Seattle or down here. We met in campus ministry. So I had met Father John Hester at Stanford and become a part of the ministry there. And that was growing, and then I had decided, okay, I'd heard about a program at the Graduate Theological Union
Which was fairly new at that time, too.
It was fairly new at that time, too, where I could get a master's in applied theology.
All right.
And with that was a year of field work. And so I did a 12-month internship with Father Hester at Stanford Hospital in chaplaincy.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a taskmaster. There wasn't, when that year was over, I could have gone to a hospital and begun a program from the bottom to the top.
That's a great testament to Father Hester.
Absolutely, and his training of lay ministers. So this was all going on while Carl was in the Deacon program.
Right.
And I felt like a fish out of water,
Sure.
you know, because there really was no support. Carl didn't have time to, you know, you want to do your thing, you do your thing. But
Yeah.
he didn't have time to be supportive. And to be honest, although the staff was aware that I was in ministry, I don't think that they had any idea the commitment.
Oh, probably not.
That was, and how tired I was.
Sure.
And that I was so tired of hearing how to support my husband as he began a ministry which would impact our family. Our family had been impacted for years.
Right? This was not new information.
Not new information. And it was hard. It was
Sure.
painful. It was painful.
So he was ordained in 79, and 2 years later we became a diocese.
Yes.
Now, do you remember how you felt or how Carl felt at the time?
Well, I didn't ask Carl how he felt. I was elated. And how he felt, that was fine either way.
Right.
But his ministry had been in San Francisco, too far away from me.
Sure.
Too big. My ministry was local, at the hospital.
Sure. Palo Alto, Stanford. Yeah.
In Palo Alto. And I thought, now we're coming down to size. Now we can be a community. I can become more involved locally, and there will be support. It's like I left this behind.
Well, and Bishop Dumaine was very supportive, wasn't he?
He was extremely supportive. I remember it was the first retreat of
The deacon
deacons
couples.
Deacon couples, yes. And he had come down to be available for anyone who wanted to talk to him. And I was still hurting from the diaconate training experience. And I thought, I'll go in and talk to him. So I did. I went in to see him and to talk to him. And finally, at the end of it, and I think he was kind of puzzled, maybe, what was this all about? And I just looked at him and I said, Bishop, I need a bishop too. He got it.
That is
From
great.
then on, I had a bishop and tremendous support. I am so grateful to Bishop Dumaine. Always will be.
Well, and Bishop Dumaine was always so supportive of lay ministry, not just supportive, encouraging of lay ministry.
Absolutely.
And particularly women.
Absolutely.
He did more for women in this diocese.
Oh, he was wonderful.
Absolutely.
And through him, again, more and more connections as my ministry evolved, because I felt I had a home, I felt I had support. And the office wasn't too far from where we were living, remember? It
That's
was
right, on Los Altos, at St.
Los
Joseph's.
Altos.
Exactly.
That's right.
Yeah.
Those were rich and wonderful years.
So how long were you involved in hospital ministry?
Oh, my. Well, before Carl studied for the diaconate, I can't remember exactly how long, but a long time.
Long time, yeah.
A long time.
Well, Father Hester was at Stanford for a very long time.
He was at Stanford a very long time, and I'd always wanted to meet him. And so I'd gone over one afternoon to meet him, and I was working in the Curcio then, and was trying to find a spiritual director. And of course, he told me why he couldn't do that, and a little bit about the ministry, and I said, that's it. That's what I want. So then I took his training to be a Eucharistic minister, and I would go Monday evenings. Evenings were a wonderful time to visit patients. And back then, they stayed for a long time. They weren't booted out in 2, 3, 4 days. And if they were having cancer treatment, they would come in and out. So you could build relationships and have a very rich and rewarding ministry.
Yes, I am sure.
At that time.
Yeah.
And I remained very much involved in working on a training program for other lay ministers in the hospital. Then I did my year's internship. This was while Carl was going through his training. But at the end, just before he was ordained, I really went into burnout, and I took a leave of absence from the hospital. I said, I can't do this anymore. And
it's pretty intense ministry, I would think.
It was intense. Yeah. It was intense, rich and rewarding, but I was like doing two things, and so I said, okay, I guess I have to be a deacon's wife for a while. Didn't sit well particularly, but that was what was needed.
I suspect I was in the pews listening to many of Carl's homilies, and I think I heard some Helen Bunje in those homilies.
Yes, you did. This is how it worked. Carl would have his ideas, and he'd write it out, and he'd work with it, and then we'd talk about it, and I typed them. Carl couldn't type, and he couldn't read his writing either. So obviously, I had to type them in large enough print and script them so as I could follow and he could breathe. That part was fine, but then we'd get down to some of his theological statements or scripture statements, and by then, I had all my coursework at the Graduate Theological Union, plus my years of armchair theology reading, and we would argue theology till he'd straighten it out. And then we would get on, and those were wonderful discussions.
I can imagine, and knowing Carl, no grudges. I'm sure it was, oh, Lovey, you're right.
No. Oh, never.
Never? Oh.
Never, never. Well,
Lovey, though.
If that's the way you're going to tape it, Lovey, I guess I can type it. Yes, because it's not going to be the other way because it's not correct. Scripture says.
Yes. But he was a wonderful preacher.
Oh, he was.
Delivery.
He was.
In fact, Father Richard Hilliard, when I was working with him in the Office for Worship, I remember his saying, Carl Bunje is the best proclaimer in the diocese.
Yes.
Nobody could proclaim the gospel like
he
Carl
loved
did.
it.
He loved it.
He loved it, and he loved the people. He truly did. He was a wonderful deacon. Even sometimes if it was a little hard, he was a wonderful
He was a good deacon. Yeah.
But he had been a debater back in his Georgetown college years, so he had lots of experience
some of that.
in public speaking and an extrovert. So
quite a combination.
Yes, it was.
Now tell me, you taught at St. Patrick's Seminary. How did that come about?
That came about during the year that I was doing my internship at the hospital. We had seminarians.
Oh, sure,
on their
field
pastoral year, their field work. And I was supervising them with Father Hescher, so I got to know them very well. And Father Tim Kidney was...
priest of our diocese?
Yes, absolutely. He was in charge of the field work. So I would meet with Father Tim, and we would discuss a lot of things. And then he asked me when I finally got my paper written, my thesis, and the degree in my hot hand, he said, now you can teach at the seminary. He said, I've been waiting. And he asked me to teach a course in hospital ministry. And after a few years of that, then I taught one on grief and grieving. which I felt was very, very important.
Seminarians
I loved
needed to
teaching at
know
the seminary. I really did. The Sulpicians and the staff and the students, those were wonderful years.
I know. I have taught at the seminary, as you know, and I would agree with you. The Sulpicians particularly.
Absolutely.
Great men.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Father Tim's support was incredible. He was really wonderful.
So that lasted, and then now the other thing that you've, as I say, you have made so many contributions to our diocese, spiritual direction. How did that happen?
That happened, I took my leave of absence. Well, maybe it starts up a little before that. While I was teaching at the seminary, Sister Mary Ann Schofield, who had been my spiritual director, was teaching courses in spiritual direction, and I thought, oh, I can take them. I'm here.
Sit
here
in.
I am. And so I did. And the reason I did was people from the community had been asking for spiritual direction. And the first one that I said, oh, I just don't think I can do that. I really haven't been trained. She came back a year later and she said, well, are you ready now? And then others, and I said, you know, maybe there's an invitation here. And so I started very simply. And then there came, I think it was after I had taken my leave of absence from the seminary and trying to get stabilized and back on my feet. I went on an 8-day retreat at Villa Maria del Mar. It was a silent women's retreat. It was interesting. They were all religious women but myself, and on the list of those who were there, down in the corner, secular, and my name. It was hysterical. Yeah. But the sisters were incensed. They found that was not right. They were very supportive of that. And at the,
they moved you up.
They moved me up. You know, the secular. You know, just put your name down. You know, if you have to do that. Not like she doesn't belong somehow. Anyway, Janet Ruffing was on that retreat, and the last night of the retreat, she had to leave the next day. We were on the beach, and we happened to be talking and sharing, and I told her that I was betwixt and between, and I said, if I go back to hospital ministry as a main ongoing ministry, by now the children were older, and this was easier to do, then they won't count my internship. I will have to take a year of CPE. Then there's this invitation growing to spiritual direction, and I'm standing between the two. And a week later, I got a call from Mercy Center. Would I be on the team that was beginning a new program, a summer program, an intensive internship in spiritual direction? It was a month live-in intensive program. I couldn't turn that down. It was wonderful. And
and that program is still going strong.
It's still there. And I taught in that program for 5 years.
Wow.
And then life, you know, moves different ways, but it was.
And at that time, you were also doing spiritual direction? Because
Yes.
I know several of our priests have gone to you with great gratitude.
Yes, and that is the one ministry in my ancient age that I can still do, because I don't have to go anywhere and times can be set. And I was advised some years ago by one of our beloved priests, now a bishop, not to give up spiritual direction, that I would really go into a depression. And he was right, because when my mother was very ill and I had to cut way back, and I found that very painful and very hard. because it's so life-giving. All ministry is life-giving.
It is, yeah.
But I could see in reviewing the years last night the evolution of it all, and how that felt. And each way, even in hospital ministry, there's elements of spiritual direction there, particularly when we could really be with people and walk them through their long illnesses. That depth of sharing in the soul of another is pure gift, pure gift.
Yeah. You know, I was thinking to myself as you were talking, particularly about your early experiences as the wife of a deacon. I think you did get over it because you served on the Deacon Formation Board for the Diocese of San Jose.
I did. And see, this is what it meant to be part of this new diocese. I felt connected in all ways and supported and a part of it. And we could be a deacon couple, not a deacon and his wife. Yeah. And there's a big difference in the feeling there. And and in the smallness of the diocese, where I could come to know so many priests and women religious and different groups of people, it was so rich. It was so wonderful. And I just am so grateful. I've been so blessed.
I think one of the great gifts that you brought from your own experience of deacon formation to ours in San Jose is the concern about the women. Remember, you and I had several meetings with the women
we did.
Where they could just air whatever was in their hearts.
Whatever was in their hearts. And for some, like for myself, it was a struggle. It wasn't easy. There were others, maybe from another culture with another way of looking at it, but there was a significant number of the wives that were struggling with what that meant to have a husband who was a deacon in ministry and how to support and yet maintain their own soul and sanity at the same time.
Yeah, and so you brought that to bear.
Yes.
For the current.
I love being on the deacon board, the formation board and the board. That was.
Now, you are a widow now, but you still stay kind of connected with the deacon community?
Oh, I do. Oh, and I just got a call this morning from Tom Kumbelik, that one of the original class, Jerry Friedman, up in San Rafael, had passed away. And I'm reflecting, oh, that means there's only 2 left from that class.
Is Tom and
Martano, who's in the San Francisco Archdiocese. And I just thought, oh, well, some of them are getting up in their 90s. Carl was, Tom is, and Mar's a little younger.
But the new ones, also you and I go and visit them on their retreat once a year.
We do, and they're wonderful.
And they're always very glad to see you.
They're wonderful, and they have had their gatherings also a couple times during the year, and I've always been invited to everything, and it's good. And I'm on the list. I get every email, every notice of anything. It's as if I'm still full-time.
That's wonderful. Well, you are in some ways.
And they're wonderful. And the training program that the diocese has, I think is exceptional.
Yeah,
I really do.
I would agree. One of the things I was thinking about, you and I were both members of St. Albert the Great Parish. And in 1987, you might remember, the diocese embarked on sort of a process to bring the 5 Palo Alto worship centers, parishes together. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. That was very interesting.
It's a very interesting time.
That's one way to put it. To go from the 4 large parishes to the smaller St. Anne's, which was Stanford parish, into one parish. We came here in 1960, And back then the parishes were all full. I know that in our oldest son's second grade class, there were 50 students.
Wow.
And yet down the line, there weren't even enough to keep the school open. So there were a lot of young families, there were a lot of children, and a strong sense of community and active involvement. The women's group, which met every month.
Oh, and CFM.
And the CFM and the, what's this, the group? I can't think of it.
But a parish group.
A parish group. And people took a very strong sense of care and responsibility for the parish and worked together. And I loved being a part of that. That was wonderful.
Well, that's how you and I met.
That's how we
parish,
met.
right?
That's how we met. Right. And so each parish had its liturgy committee and director, and its youth director and committee, and catechetical director and committee, and its own pastoral center.
And its own pastor.
And its own pastor. And all in closely working together. The first change was when Aloysius was sold. And I think that was the one that was suffering the greatest loss in terms of community. And those that remained had to move to Our Lady of the Rosary. That was very difficult. They really felt their sacred ground was taken away from them, like a tribe moved to another, relocated. And then the others remained, but as they became one parish, there was one catechetical director over all, one liturgist over all. And most of these were hired from outside the parish, too. These were new people all coming in to tell the different sites how they needed to operate and what they needed to do. And it did not sit well. Folk were angry.
I remember.
Very disempowered. And they were. They were disempowered. Now, yes, they had their committees who were told what to do by someone from a pastoral center. And everyone struggled with it, and everyone tried. And I think it took a long time, because it was as if they had the feeling that they were being told one size fits all, and it didn't. They were very different communities. The St. Albert the Great, Crescent Park community, was the most affluent part of town. Our Lady of the Rosary, where the housing was smaller and less affluent, had more of the families with children, which could no longer afford the north part of town, and at this point can't afford the other either.
Exactly.
But, and then the downtown Thomas Aquinas, people who were working, living in apartments or whatnot. So you have three very different communities.
With different histories, too.
With different histories. All very wounded by how do we make this work, you know. And they were like families who suddenly are in a forced marriage that they really didn't want. And everyone tried hard. Everyone was of good faith. They were wonderful people. It's just that there was no model in place as to how to do this. And so there was a lot of kind of stumbling. And it took several pastors and much work to get this mixing to go on to where now people are comfortable going anywhere. They still pretty much stay in their same communities, but
But 30 years later, there is a sense of the parish.
There is a sense of parish.
Yeah, that the parish is St. Thomas Aquinas.
Yes, it is. And they're proud of it. And they work together on things like the Green Committee, and if something is needed at one site, the other sites will chip in to help support it. And there is a sense of one parish now.
But it took quite a while.
Yes, it did. I think it had to skip a generation and go down.
You're right. And of course, new people coming in also who didn't have that history.
They didn't have the old history.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know what? I was just thinking to myself, you and Monsignor Jean Boyle were very good friends.
Oh, yes.
And would you tell us something about Jean, some stories? Sadly, Jean went to God before we had a chance to, you know, have him as part of this oral history. So talk to us about Monsignor Boyle.
Well, I remember when he was first sent to St. Anne's.
Now, this would have been before we became a diocese.
Before Carl became a deacon.
It's okay. So we were part of the archdiocese.
He was part of the archdiocese, yes. And he was sent to St. Anne's, and I remember his first homily because the way he took the gospel just was so right on, and it was so great. I had to go out right back after Mass and tell him, you know, and that started it between the two of us. And we became close friends. He had me on campus ministry. I asked him to be spiritual director of a Cursillo we were working on. He was over at the house a lot. He and Carl got on famously. So this was something we could all be a part of. My mother, who was living with us after a while, loved him to pieces. They had the same birthday. They celebrated it together every year. He was there New Year's Eve. He was there Christmas. He was family. He was family. My kids, he's family.
Did he talk with you when we became a diocese? Because you know the priest for the first time had a choice of which diocese.
I know. That was wonderful. He did. What he said was, and it's a dear story, he wrote 2 letters, one acceptance for San Francisco and the other acceptance for San Jose, and he put them each in a pocket, and he lived with that for a long time, and then finally he said, no, it's San Jose.
Thank heavens for us.
I gave prayers of thanks.
Well, then he was very much involved in the whole transition when we became a diocese, as far as setting up the installation and the working with the civic leaders.
Yes, and he was so good at that. He was a brilliant man, talented, very, very caring. Our friendship lasted all the way to the very end. I was with him in the afternoon. Maureen Locke and I went to see him the afternoon of the day that he passed. And he was just like sleeping, and I thought, well, he could be asleep or he could be in a little coma, hard to know what. We knew he was on hospice, but I just thought, that's okay. We had big conversation that included him, because I learned in the hospital, hearing is the last sense to go. And they hear in a coma. Patients told me what they heard sometimes. Not a good
So
thing.
be careful.
Be careful. So we had conversations that included him, and I bent over and I kissed him goodbye. And then I heard that evening that he was gone.
He was gone, yeah.
Did
he speak at all about Cesar Chavez, about his work?
Oh, he did. He did. And that meant he was totally dedicated to wherever there was a need. And he talked about his time visiting Cesar in prison. He also talked about the time he went to prison. And his involvement with Dolores Huerta and the other farm workers. And that's when he learned to fly, because it was taking too long to drive to all of these events. So he learned to fly, and he would take out a plane and travel to
the Central Valley.
And wherever he needed to be. And the other commitment he had that just stirred me deeply was his commitment that terms the March with Martin Luther King to ending racism and the struggles that he had. He and Father Hester were both involved in the march in Selma. And in San Francisco at Sacred Heart Parish, he was having breakfast for the children of the Black Panthers. Nothing to do with the Black Panthers themselves, their ideology or anything, just simply the children were hungry. And comic books were found, and horrible, you know, this priest and all of that, and it was stopped. And later on it came out that the FBI had actually planted those comic books to disgrace, you know.
Because didn't he run for city council?
He did.
Councilman?
He did, and he didn't make it, and that's when he went. That was before he came down to St. Anne's. He had a little period there as a priest without an assignment. And from there he came down to St. Anne's. And Carl had known him from his San Francisco involvement. That's why Jean always called him the BCL.
Big Catholic layman.
But he was, he would sometimes push me where I wasn't, maybe thought I wasn't ready to go.
Oh, Jean could do that.
And he could do that. And he could do that.
Yeah. Anything else that we should talk about in terms of the history of our diocese? You're just a wealth of information.
Oh, I think our diocese has been particularly blessed. We had Bishop DeMaine, before he retired, in place long enough to really get things moving and get things moving for women. He wouldn't even start a deacon program until women were more supported and involved in ministry, because he felt this thing should grow together. And until that happened, he wasn't going to ordain a bunch of men as deacons. God love him for that.
He was pretty clear about that.
He was very clear about that. And then having Bishop PJ, who is such a love. We've been very, very blessed that these two bishops have fostered involvement by lay people and developed a diaconate program that really, you know, it's so much more than Carl got. It really is. They go through the Institute for Lay Ministry, which is, as you know, having taken care of that for a number of years. It's wonderful, formative. And then to Santa Clara for their studies. So that now, you know, I had so much more theological training and background than Carl. That doesn't happen now. The men are getting it. But the women, too, can go to Santa Clara and get their degree. I wouldn't have had to go all the way over to Berkeley. That's a long drive.
Cross a bridge. No, we are, one of the great gifts of our diocese, too, is just the resources that we have available to us.
Absolutely.
When you think we're only one county, and we have 3 universities.
We do.
1 Catholic university.
We do.
You know, 2 major universities. We're very, very lucky.
And also, there isn't anyone that we're not free to call or contact if we have an issue or a problem, if anything comes up. There's a very good sense of commitment to the people and the people to the diocese that I sense.
Oh, and we're small enough. I mean,
you see?
Travel us.
That was the
compact
big,
is the word. We're
yeah,
compact,
you know,
because
no more big diocese.
Yeah.
I don't like big. Big stifles growth. I think this is the perfect size.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And yet, with a huge population, but compact.
Yes.
So that you can.
You can get around.
Yeah,
you can get around.
exactly.
Within an hour, a little more, you can be anywhere
in the diocese.
and everywhere. You know, it's and that's something else that I've also loved over the years, is going into the different parishes and giving either spiritual reflection evening or instruction on one thing or another, and getting to know the people throughout. That could never have happened in San Francisco. It couldn't. It was too big. It's too big. So the sense of community, I think that's developed, has been very wonderful.
Well, Helen, thank you. This has just been a delight speaking with you, and you've given us all kinds of wonderful information and insights about the diocese. So thank you very much.
Well, you are so welcome, and thank you for asking me, because it's been a marvelous review of God's graciousness and gifts and love for me.
Amen.